there is no middle point where we're both content. That's not.
You got to figure out
something.
Right? You got to figure out something else.
Everybody's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, right? And the goal isn't to like solve the problem. Be like, okay, here's a way where everybody's comfortable now, right? It's a way to transfer the discomfort, like
share it.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 413 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast, Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm also sort of the games programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's April 28th, 20 Jubilee. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be just incessant cursing on this show. Not like bad words kind. We're gonna do some legit hexes this time around.
Are a hex and a curse the same thing?
They gotta be.
I feel like
Yeah.
they must be different
Well,
somehow. A hex feels like a light curse.
I think it's just more about the delivery method.
Yeah.
I think hexes require more like runes and artifacts and stuff, and
Or
curses
like
you
a
can
hand
usually-
symbol, right? So it's like
curses you can just kind of use
just
those
say it.
out verbally. Yeah, no, that's no problem.
convenient.
Yeah. So always go to curses. They're better for the environment too, because you don't have to use up so many materials.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Especially rare materials, because like usually for like hexes and stuff, you gotta go like
you need gold, you need
Salamander
silver,
eyes,
you need cobalt,
salamander eyes, yeah.
also salamander eyes.
Real hard to get.
Yeah, well, especially if like because of climate change and stuff, like now you're gonna have all these endangered pools of animals if there are even any left, and if you're also now harvesting their eyeballs for hexes, like
It's just too much.
yeah, it's not
You know?
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's why you do it the safe way. Just take their eyes and then release them back into the wild. It'll be fine.
Yeah, they
Don't even worry
grow
about
them
it.
back, right?
They grow back like tails.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'd just like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for the monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. All right, so we're just going to go right into questions today. So these questions come from our listeners at podcast.bscotch.net. So if you'd like to get your question onto a future episode, just go there and ask it, and hopefully it's a good one. And then people will upvote it, and then we'll read it. All right, here we go. Highest upvoted question comes from Beekie Boppaboop, who says, how often do you watch or read devlogs? If you do, is it for work or for fun?
I read a lot of technical blogs. So I'm on my RSS feed reader. I've got like the GitHub blog, and then I got basically all the tech that I use and all like the libraries I use and stuff. Like if they have a blog, then I'm subscribed to it, and I just read that stuff as it comes out.
Those are more like here's the new feature that we're
it's like
releasing
new
soon.
features, or it's like discussions about like why they're doing something, or like tips and tricks for some aspect of the tool, whatever, that kind of stuff. So I do that kind of thing, and then every once in a while there's a few companies that have decent, more like devlog style things where it's just like getting into the weeds on something, but those are pretty, I find like, because most people's problems are just not anywhere close to my and our problems, that those rarely are very useful for me. So I just tend to be like, I don't care, I guess.
It kind of depends what you mean by devlogs, because there's stuff like, oh, here's an already released product that we have a new version coming, and here's some like cool insights into what we're doing. If it's a product or something or a game or something that I'm really into, then in some cases I'll look at that just to kind of it's interesting. It's just like see what's coming and why, right? What the thought process is. But when it comes to just devlogs in general about if somebody's working on a new game, like an independent developer who's putting out devlogs.
Yeah, I don't look at any of that.
Yeah, I don't really read those because I think it's the journey that they're going on is often, they're just oh yeah, I'm trying to make my grass look cooler in my game, and here's the path that I went down to try to do it, and they'll make videos or screenshots or whatever, which can be pretty interesting. But like Adam was saying, it's interesting if you yourself are kind of dealing with something that's covered by that blog post. But if you're not, or you have no like applicability for it, then it's kind of like,
Yeah, you're saying you guys both pay attention to those things not as a form of entertainment, but as a form of educational material.
yeah, like you try to find usefulness out of it.
I think the last one I paid attention to was the Archvale devlog series on YouTube. Archvale is like a sort of a shooty roguelike with some crafting stuff going on in it. It's got some kind of like Nuclear Throne and Forager sort of feel to it in terms of how it plays and the kind of pixel artiness. And the thing I was actually impressed by with it is that the usually devlogs are rough because like you're fucking making a whole game and it's hard. Like editing videos takes a very long time.
Yep. Yeah, there's the context problem, right? Like it's a whole game. So any given post, if the person hasn't been following the devlog the whole time, then
you're sort of whittling down an audience over time. And so I was very impressed because even the first one they put out, the videos are just polished and they somehow, I think, do a good job of riding that line between like they'll dip a little bit into a few like the technical weeds of how something works. But I mean very much a little bit. Like, oh, we finally figured out this thing by using this function and then doing this thing. But then otherwise it's like, yeah, we got these cool shrines set up. We got this set up. And so it's almost
it's more of it's not like a technical details slug, but
yeah, it is.
It's more of like a following along with the progress kind of a thing. Right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think those ones are actually
rare. Like
they're rare because they're both hard to. It's very hard to walk that line as a dev of not going too far, as people in this podcast can attest, like not going too far into the technical details about something because basically the further you go in, the more you lose people, but also not making it purely a sort of just an expose on like, here's how the design of this thing works, right?
It's as you said, very time costly. But then there's also because this is something that we talk about a lot because like we're doing lots of cool stuff and we discover new things as we go, so like we just implemented basically 2 of the new core or the remaining core features in Crashlands 2 over the past 2 weeks, right? And going and like in that process of them like coming to life of like not having it at all and then like having the kind of few prototypes in place that test out different concepts of it, right? And then kind of the approximate final version is a really cool progression, right? And we have all these also like fun internal dev tools inside the game where we can like have all these overlays that show you a lot more information about like how the game is doing things and making decisions about stuff, right? That is frankly very cool, right? And it's the kind of stuff that every time like Seth puts a new one of these things together to help him debug something or program something, every time I look at it, I'm like, oh, it'd be really cool to show this to people, But the problem is always every time like, well, how do we fit this into like our launch strategy, right? So that because we don't want to reveal too much and we don't want to invite people to be like, oh, I hate this because of X, right? When it's an early version of the game. So it's like, how do we frame this appropriately to make sure that we don't cause problems for ourselves in the future? But most importantly, though, is where do we find the time to sit down for like a couple hours to put together a decent video that's actually even worth watching, right?
Yeah. To me, this is a post-launch thing, which is like, nobody wants to know how a game was made if they don't care about the game or know anything about it. Yeah. Right. And so like if you've launched the game and it has an audience, people know it, they know the game, they've played it, they know how it works. Right. Then if you say, oh yeah, like here's some of the cool developer tools that we have to help us make this game. Here's this overlay that shows like how buildings are calculated. Right. And like, because you now don't have to explain how like what buildings are in this game or whatever, like the context is there
and how this compares to what you'll actually play as a player, right?
Yeah. So like at that point, it's kind of like if somebody had never seen a car before and you're like, hey, you want me to pop open the hood and you can like see the engine of this thing? They're like, what is it though? Like what's an engine? What are you talking about? What's a hood? So you just need that audience, I think. Yeah. Which is something that we could think about doing maybe.
Yeah, I think there is enough stuff with games that is like just already interesting because it's such a visual medium, and also people understand, the foundational stuff of games pretty well. So I think there is enough stuff there that people can still find it and have a really good time if they're just interested in how games work. But it is the case though that, like you're saying, if there's the being interested in how this stuff works in general, which is one audience, right, and there's being interested in your game specifically and how it works. Mm-hmm. Which is actually kind of a non-overlapping audience, right? Like it's like 2 separate pools of people.
It's not a Venn diagram.
Yeah,
so it's circles.
And there's people who would buy your game and play it, after it launches, which is also a different group of people.
Yeah, different group
with only minimal overlap between the other ones. So I see a lot of indie devs do pursue a devlog strategy, but the problem is that because it's very hard to get that initial traction, right? So you could start with basically your audience of peers who are also, indie devs doing stuff. But I think either you have to produce videos that have such high polish that they actually can reach outside of the audience a bit or hit like a lot of them. So in the case of Archvale, I think they did that actually very successfully. Or you have to recognize that like the time you're spending there is not necessarily going to get you an audience who will buy the game, but it might get you something else. Yeah.
Or it serves as a foundation for like going to give talks at conferences and that kind of stuff.
There's other purposes for it, certainly, but I think I personally would never rely on it as the actual marketing strategy for a game.
There's maybe one other purpose. So I think about like Stardew Valley. So that was kind of a rare case where the developer was working pretty much alone for like 5 years. And he had ended up, putting together a subreddit, but I think he started in like the Harvest Moon community, right? And like he kind of got
in their forums.
Got to a point where Stardew Valley was like, it was starting to feel like have that feel of Harvest Moon. So he like shared it with that community and then kind of like spun off his own community and started like just interacting with that community a lot, which built up a lot of kind of hype over time. But I think in his case, it was kind of twofold. One was, I think if he hadn't done that, he probably would never have finished the game because if you're working completely alone with no external feedback for 5 years, it's a mental health nightmare.
Even for 6 months, man. Like, I mean, I think this, to your point, there's a different side of this, which is a devlog as a tool for getting some feedback and getting those wins basically throughout a lone or a small team development cycle that is oftentimes just very isolating and not particularly fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's brutal,
It's brutal.
And I think in his case, he was able to sort of like capitalize on the excitement about the kind of game that he was making and that there was kind of like a hole in the market, which is that on its own is an incredibly rare thing, right? And like that's something that we kind of looked at when we started work on Levelhead. We're like, wow, like people love Mario Maker. Doesn't look like there's going to be any kind of a follow up to it, and like there's been complete silence about it. And also, it's like stuck on the Wii U, I think it was. And so we were like, oh man, like this kind of game is really great. There's not that many out there. And we think there's going to be like this big hole in the market that we can just kind of jump into and capitalize on the Mario Maker fans, just like what happened with Stardew Valley and Harvest Moon, except, Mario Maker 2 did come out a year before we launched Levelhead. And so we ended up like with the rush. There was all this stuff, right? So like it's very hard to do what Concerned Ape did with Stardew Valley is like find that existing audience that nobody else is serving or planning on serving. Oh man, that's tough.
It's a rough one. Yep.
All right, next question comes from Bupanoilie Rolleepa, who says, what content moderation lessons have you learned from working on games based on user-generated content, such as Levelhead?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my God.
The main lesson is avoid at all costs features that are going to require moderation, right? Or sort of similarly, design your features of the game with moderation in mind so that they minimize or remove the need to do it, right? So you'll see if you play Levelhead, which is the one game we have where like we really have UGC so other people can see the stuff that you're making, and it's designed around that, like you're designed to share levels. And you'll notice that like every aspect about it is designed to minimize how much players can weaponize things against each other and to minimize how they could exploit some feature to, cause community harm in a way that would be moderatable, right? And it was a point of discussion all the way through the entire development. Was every time we'd be talking about something cool we wanted to do, we'd ask, okay, but will we then have to moderate this? And if so, we should probably lean towards not doing it or trying to find a way to, change it so that is something we have to do, right? So you'll still see this like we have. So the one thing you can really just kind of freely choose is your username in Levelhead, right? But we also have an option to, like, for you as the user to not see people's chosen usernames, right? Where every user has a default random nearly guaranteed to not be offensive because it's impossible to actually do that, right? But like nearly guaranteed to be inoffensive username. And you can just opt into only seeing those, right? It's like on Switch because they have like the detection of like the user, whether it's a underage user or whatever, right? We just have it like then do that. So it just only shows that content. And with like the titles, we have a fun little, we call it the combobulator, right? Where you like plug words in and like, or select random things, right? From a pool of existing words. And use that so that people can't just freely choose titles because, you know, we're trying to avoid that chaos.
Yeah, but you can't avoid it. Like in was it Elden Ring kind of had something similar where you could like choose words to put on signs or whatever. And then like what was the popular ones, like something like finger butthole. Yeah. Like but B-U-T. Like they didn't have B-U-T-T. Yeah. Of course, like who cares? People just put butt. Like so you'd come across somebody had put a sign in the world just as like finger butthole, right? Yeah.
Which is like, why? Well, because my opinion about most of those things is like, who cares, right? It's only when you have like people are actively, you know, are actively trying to like throw slurs at each other or being like, malicious.
The Elden Ring stuff falls in that category of things that are like the players feel like they're getting away with something and it ends up being kind of crass, but it's like who cares? You know?
There's a huge difference between crass and hateful. Right? Yes. Like crass is just like it's kind of like it's about something like sexual or some kind of body function, which is like it's just kind of goofy and whatever.
Yeah. Who cares?
But who cares? Yeah. I mean, for me, actually, the big moderation thing is something that we unfortunately didn't really have a lot of control over. So we did do stuff like the name combobulator and all this other stuff about text, right?
Yeah.
But when we're publishing on these different platforms, Steam, Xbox, whatever, there's an expectation that we have, or in some cases even a hard requirement that we have an achievement system that's integrated into the achievement system of the platform. And we hate this. Like we hate it. We hate this because there's a subset of
achievements are one of the worst features to go into games. I think. Yeah, it was cool when it first came out, but now it's become a bad thing in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, the problem is it's required and it's
expected.
It's a thing on a platform that people view as like there's like collector players, these achievement hunters, where basically, this is maybe like 0.1% of all people who use like Xbox or Steam or whatever. There's not that many of them.
Yeah, but really fucks with player incentives.
Yeah, what these people do is they're like, I'm going to get every single achievement on every game that I play in whatever is the most efficient way possible, whether that be hacking, whether that be doing some kind of a weird exploit, or in the case of Levelhead, we have a couple of achievements about like publishing levels and getting plays on your levels and stuff like that. So the moderation burden that we've had is that, we were forced to add all these achievements that hook into various platforms. So like we've got them. And because they exist, some people will come in and be like, oh, there's an achievement for publishing 30 levels. Okay. And then they just clone the same level 30 times. And it's just like a touch the goal, instantly be done kind of a thing. And then they'll publish the same identical tiny level 30 times. And then they'll make a separate account that will just like be a bot that plays that level just like 1,000 times so they can get the achievement for having their levels played also. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's like, so then
for the most part, we've insulated things because of all the other design decisions in Levelhead, right? Because like you don't see random player levels until they've been boosted up into the market, right? Yes. The whole idea there is it's supposed to have required that a person invest into playing other people's levels to get their level visible to people, right? And we have lots, like if you look through the design aspects of the entirety of Levelhead, it's basically all designed around this idea that we're trying to foster a positive community engagement between people creating and playing levels. And we're trying to minimize incentives or just, outcomes, but positive outcomes for players who are trying to exploit it in some way. Yeah. But when the incentives, because when the incentive is just like, players are playing your level, there's actually just not a strong incentive to put in a lot of effort to then make that a bad experience for other players, right?
Yes. Right.
But when you start adding these like external incentives of, the achievements and stuff, then it can be just heavy enough that a player can now just say, well, I don't care what the impact is on other players. I'm going to go get this thing, right?
But that's one of those things that like we do get to choose where to put the achievements, right? But what's strange about it is in certain game contexts, it'd be weird. I think we can all agree it'd be kind of weird if in Levelhead there were no achievements associated with publishing levels or getting plays, because that is essentially the point of the game. And so we have to thread that line where it's like, it feels correct. Where like if you are a player who is enjoying the game and you're playing it like a regular person does, it's awesome to get an achievement like that when you hit these certain milestones, right? And we have to sort of balance that against like, okay, well, if we put this in, we know that there's going to be some people who flood, who just come in and flood stuff because they're just trying to get that achievement. So you always have
still
to
chose them carefully to minimize like just how much people would be incentivized to do that stuff.
Yeah, and it's only been a few times where we've had to come in and like mute somebody, which basically means like people can't see their levels anymore or whatever. Yeah. We're like, because a lot of our decisions too, when it comes to like people hacking their own games or whatever, it's like, okay, we don't care. We only care if what the player is doing adversely affects someone else. If somebody ruins their own game experience, they like hack their game and make it crash or do some weird shit to it. Good for you, buddy. Like you're having the experience you signed up for, right?
Chase your bliss.
Yep. Yeah. So that's the only time where we kind of worry about. But something that we've been talking about is there's also a content moderation problem when it comes to player developer interactions, which is like if you want to be able to receive feedback from your players about bugs or features they would like to see.
And you also have
to
an extent because
once it's launched, you do.
Yes. Once it's launched, because platforms expect that, and presumably like, because you also have to have a terms of service. Like once you're operating professionally and signing contracts and things, right? There's an expectation that there's some mechanism by which a player can reach out to you and say, hey, my shit's broke, fix it.
But the problem is like, because almost everybody is completely accustomed to being ignored. Whenever they're trying to give feedback to a company or get customer service or whatever, they know that they're going to be run around, just get the run around and nothing will happen. And so they come in guns blazing.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the time. Very angry, very inflammatory language, but trying to be as loud. It's kind of like making yourself big, to like scare off the bear, right? It's like people come in all like inflated and enraged. And it usually just takes like one response from the developer or whatever to suddenly like tamp that down. Where the person's like, oh,
depending on the response, but
kind of depending, yeah. And so we were like, the problem is if they come in hot, then it's, well, for starters, it kind of ruins your day if you read it, right? Yeah. Because they're pissed off at you, and it's very hard for you to get your own emotions down enough that you can write a reply that diffuses the rage, right? Because the rage might just be like, oh yeah, like I did this thing and then my game crashed and then I lost 1 minute of progress. Like that does happen. Whatever.
Yeah, but it could also be like more understandable where it's like, oh, like I've been playing Crashlands for 30 hours, right? And I booted it up and now all of my data appears to be gone, right?
Yeah, and that has happened as well. And there's weird stuff like maybe like the game was mid-save and then somebody's battery died. Yep. Right. And it's like the file got corrupted. Yeah. Like those kinds of things are rare and we try to do stuff to mitigate them, but we can't cover every case. So sometimes people come in angry, and we were talking about like, it'd be really nice if we use something like OpenAI's ChatGPT API so that anytime like all of our feedback requests that come in actually get like de-angrified.
Right? Sanitize them emotionally so we could
read them. We pass them over to ChatGPT and we're like, hey, can you make this can you change the tone of this message to be friendly while keeping the overall point, right? And then like it would show us that version of it, so we could just reply, not get all fired. It's like I think that'd be a great thing.
Well, because I mean, most studios have a community manager or QA have part of their role is basically these acting as the emotional shields. For the dev team, right?
Absorbing humanity's sins.
Yeah, absorb the first hit and then convert it into something that you can actually make use of. And there's lots of talks on this, if you look at GDC or whatever else, but like sort of just surviving that mentally is it's
so much abuse. Yeah. And the more players you have, the bigger, the more customer service you need, the bigger the dev team gets, the more people you have employed to just like be abused by customers, And the wild thing is like games also have this disproportionate problem of like, it's like I play WoW. I pay $13 a month for my subscription. It's like same price as like Netflix or something. Right. And like in the grand scheme of things, out of my overall budget, $13 is not, it's not a,
it's fine.
If I, compare that to my mortgage or my food or whatever,
it's not a luxury good in terms of
it's not a luxury good. And I'm not like being put out on the street because I put so much money into this subscription. Like, right. It's a small piece of the pie, but it's an outsized piece of my attention and time. Right. Like I play the game a lot. I think about it a lot. And I put a lot of my life into it. And so it's very weird on the business side because like they'll hire customer service reps and it's like each person who comes in is paying like 30 cents a day to use your product. And it's very hard to kind of like,
but they might be playing it for 100 hours of
right. Month, it's like right? So they're coming in all like real enraged, and it's very hard on the business side to shake this feeling of like, this person is getting such a great deal. What are they so mad about? Like, sure, they had a little setback, but like 30 cents a day. I mean, come on, like. If you wanted perfect service, like, maybe pay a little more. But,
yeah. Well, I don't know. And I do think this is one of those underappreciated, underserved areas of running a game studio is actually planning ahead of time and like in the, especially prior to a launch, but just in general for what the surface area of interactions between you and the customer base looks like.
It's critical.
And I think the core strategy, as you guys are talking about currently, is just to throw human shields in the middle, like in between the studio and the public, and just let them like absorb the damage until they have a mental break and leave the industry forever, right? Like that's basically currently the business model for how that works. But you'll notice, like if you look through how we've set up all of our, like if you go to our website and go to our support system, right? You'll notice that everything is designed to try to both pre-filter, so we just have less stuff coming through, but not in a way that's too aggravating, hopefully, right? But sort of pre-filter, so we just reduce how much stuff comes in. But then you'll also notice, like if you do try to like leave feedback in our feedback system, there's like 6 little things you have to agree to as you go through, and all of them are oriented towards reminding you that there's people on the other side and encouraging you to like not be an ass, right? Like that kind of stuff. But also when you like through our contact system, which is a kind of its own separate thing, if you submit something, that it goes to your inbox first so that you have a chance to reread it. And then you have to like follow a link to actually make it so that we see it, right? And we found that alone cut down an enormous amount of stuff. Like once we implemented that, where people,
there's a time delay too, isn't there?
There's not a time, but it's just like flipping between apps and stuff. Yeah. So it's just like the inherent delay, right? And so now when people like go on there, they're in a rage and they type something up really fast and they hit submit, right? And they flip over their email, right? Which they're probably also mad about, but then they like flip over their email and they look over what they said, right? And the email itself also prefaces it with a reminder, hey, like these are people, blah, 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 like tries to reframe everything in a positive way, but still tries to frame everything so that we're trying to make people just rethink what they're about to do. And we actually don't get very much.
That has cut down on the volume and the
toxicity
tone. Yeah.
That's why we don't use like,
it was
Twitter
already pretty good, but
there's why we don't use Twitter, Facebook,
for customer
any of those
service.
things where we actually have no capability in terms of formatting what a request coming in looks like.
Yep.
We, after Crashlands, the truth is like we've talked about it many times, but after the initial launch of Crashlands, even though it was a great time because you could see all these players enjoying the game,
it was also a terrible time.
Yeah, the key lesson for moderation is that it really is the fact that very few people are going to come at you with that kind of level of negativity, but the amount of damage that it causes
the impact.
you as a person.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's
really
0.1% of your players come at you enraged, that will ruin your week.
It's not good.
If you got 100,000 players, that's still going to be a substantial number of people just coming at you, swinging.
So
which nobody needs.
We basically pulled back from every platform where we're not able to manage those sorts of things, or we have a very light touch approach. Where even our QA team is told to like not to if we're going to do like, go check the reviews and whatever else. It happens like once a week on a particular day. You know what I mean? Like it's not a thing that we are asking people to do every single day of the week. Because it's also one of those things that I think if you bucket it, then you can kind of gear up for it, and then it's like, oh, I'm gonna go read some stuff today. But if it's just happening constantly and you're getting barrage, it's way too much.
Yeah, and a lot of it is we rely on just like a filter based approach, right? Where we try to have a clean enough product that goes out that's already. We try to design everything to minimize just all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's the whole shift left philosophy, right? Just like remove the possibility as much as you can of these things even happening. Yes. And then on the other side, we still rely on mechanisms to just reduce, so like Sam said, some batching mechanisms for when we look at it. We openly talk in the studio constantly about like, you're gonna see this stuff, and so like if it's bogging you down, then we need to talk about how to avoid it, and how to fix it and this kind of stuff, right? So we openly talk about that you don't have to put up with this. That's not an expectation in the studio that players just get to abuse you, right? Mm-hmm. And then we actually rely on our really engaged, positive community who's like in our Discord and stuff. Like many of the problems that we eventually like discover and deal with are things that are brought to the attention of like somebody on our team just through like the really positive members of our community who are like, oh, hey, the website's been down for an hour or whatever, right? Or like, oh, hey, we've seen a bunch of people come in saying stuff about having trouble with their saves doing something weird or whatever, right? And so by having these mechanisms where you're fostering positive communities, you're reducing toxicity in every level, and treat customer service and moderation and community management as all part of the same like collection.
It's all design problems.
It's all the same set of design problems, really. Then you can and it is, I think, essential because like Sam said, post Crashlands launch, OG Crashlands, like it was more of a volume problem than anything. It was just there was and we were checking everything. We wanted to know every single piece of feedback that everybody had. And what we've learned since then is that we actually want to get as little feedback as possible. We want the stuff that's important enough that it's going to come to the top, and we only want to receive that in a way that isn't going to ruin our day, right? And so we try to design for that. And actually with this like putting OpenAI in the loop thing, like that'll be easy to do. And I think we're going to have to do it before we launch Crashlands 2. And it'll make our lives that much better,
Yeah, I'm pretty pumped. And also by that point, I mean, who the hell knows what it'll be capable of?
Because who knows?
It's quite a ways off still. Our next question comes from QuantumAnomaly, who says, "Oh, great and wise brothers 3, I beseech thee." The Butterscotch book list is an amazing trove of knowledge on many things, but I wonder, do you have any good book suggestions that helped you understand your own flavor of neuro-spiciness, things that gave you better tools to cope with, understand, or manage being neurodivergent? Mm-hmm. So just as a point of clarification, because this is kind of like, it didn't occur to me until recently that even like the term neurodivergent is something that
is not
most people don't actually know, which is like there's what's for does neurotypical and neuroatypical or neurodivergent. So it's like basically, does your brain work in the way that most people say that brains do work? Yeah. Or is it different from that, right?
Which isn't necessarily even how brains do work, right? But it's about, is the world designed for how your brain works or not, right? Along some
right. So that's where things like, when we talk about ADHD or autism or whatever, where it's just like, you can, depending on degrees of severity, right? Like you can do a lot of the things that most people do. And there's also in many cases masking that comes in where it's like, yeah, your brain is handling things differently, but you're going to like, pretend like it's working the same just so you can get by in social situations, that kind of stuff. So anyways, that's what neurodivergence is about.
So. And neurospicy is just, like I have a suspicion that QuantumAnomaly is on TikTok because that's where I see that the most. But it's one of those like neurospicy is one of these embraced euphemisms, I guess, that the neurodivergent community likes to use on stuff, right? Because it's it's more fun and positive, right, than neurodivergent.
Yeah, and my suspicion is that the average person almost doesn't exist.
No. Everyone's dealing one way or another.
There's too many dimensions you would have to be average in, right, to be the average person. So there probably is like the average person out there, right? But they aren't representative, actually, right? So
honestly, their averageness might be so weird.
Yeah, it is actually.
Yeah,
it makes them
I mean, the most boring
divergent
person in
again.
the world. It's like, all right, I'm the exact average height. I have a 100 IQ.
Literally along every dimension. Like, you get somebody out there is average, right? Like literally average. But
they got 2.5 children.
Yeah, but I think it's like, I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent, but that idea of like, because when we say average, we mean representative, right?
Yes.
But those actually aren't synonyms, right? Because like average literally means like, oh, we just like try to find some way of representing the middle, right? Which doesn't mean it's representative of the group just because it's in the middle, right? And so if you're talking about like the average person, it's like, well, average at what? And so you have to take all these different dimensions into account and so on, right? But yeah, but like the average height isn't representative of height.
Yeah, as an example, if you have 2 legs, you have an above average number of legs.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Nice. Yeah.
Because, it's hard to have 3, but it's easy to have 1 or 0,
Yeah.
So,
What books have you guys read then that have
What was the question
have you
again?
read any?
Yeah,
Books that you've read that
books-
have offered
yeah.
some kind of clarity about neurospiciness.
So I'll say I haven't actually read, which is kind of like obvious if you think about it. I haven't really read any books on ADHD. I just have a hard time kind of focusing. No, but I've read a lot about ADHD, or like watched a lot of YouTube videos and stuff, just kind of in various forms. And people sharing their experiences or psychologists talking about, how it works, that kind of thing. And what's been really interesting about it is just that it has made me go back and rethink my interpretation and understanding of books that I had read or was like a big advocate for. So like The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, it's like, why did that resonate so hard with me? And it's because if there's a lot of things around, like a lot of clutter, then I have a hard time focusing on stuff. I need to get rid of things. And so when I read that book and then I did it, I just felt so much better, and like everything was just so much easier in my life. But that may not actually be true for many people. They may not care about clutter. They may not bother. Yeah, and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense why that was such a big deal for me. And there's a whole bunch of other books like Power of Habit, all that kind of stuff. It all kind of comes down the same track, which is I felt like I needed to read those books for a reason, and they helped me for a reason. But that reason may not actually apply.
Well, presumably the opposite is also true, right? That there are probably some books that you had heard were supposed to be important and life-changing and stuff, and that weren't. And the problem is you forget those instantly. But if you could remember what those books were, right, and then thought back, now knowing you have ADHD, you could be like, oh, actually, like there's probably interesting reasons why this didn't resonate in this.
Oh, it happens all the time. I actually have a word for those books. I call them sentence books, which is this book could have been a sentence. Like I'll be reading it and they'll be like, here's this like idea that I'm trying to get across, and then it's just like every single fucking chapter is like, here's another study that shows why this sentence I said at the beginning of the book is true. And it just, the whole book is 200 pages of just various anecdotes and studies that go back to the original sentiment. And I run out of steam like
Real quick.
15% of the way through those books. I'm like, I get it. I get it. It's fine. Like, we can move on.
Just all filler.
I think I did. I have read, I think it's called, I was trying to look it up, but in one of those like 2-factor authentication moments where everything needs some code for this. I can't look it up right now, but it's in my book list somewhere. I think it's called ADHD 2.0, I think, is the book, which I found useful. It's written by, I think, the two sort of original authors who had talked about it, and labeled ADD back in like the late 80s or something like that. I can't remember exactly the timeline for this stuff, but they talk about sort of all the updated research and also just like updated strategies and kind of what it means to have it, and honestly, it's a good book, and it's well done, and it's kind of funny because, of course, they preface it, Seth, to your point, with that like, we know we don't got a lot of time.
This book is for people with ADHD. I also feel like the more I've learned about ADHD or ADD, depending on when you're from, both of those names don't actually like it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or attention deficit disorder, but what it actually is, it's an attention threshold disorder.
Yes.
Well, it's an inability to control attention disorder, right?
Yeah, which is that like the threshold by which your brain decides what you need to be thinking about and what you don't need to be thinking about is different than the threshold for people who don't have this, right? So it's like you just can't help but be thinking about a lot of things.
If anything, you have too
sort of
much
uncontrollably. And so it's described as attention deficit disorder because the way that it manifested in consequences of like your interactions is that if you're talking to somebody with ADHD, you'll notice that they sometimes don't seem to be paying attention to you, which is like this person has a deficit of attention. And it's like, no, you're only thinking about yourself. Like, it's not that they have a deficit of attention. They just have way too much attention and they're splitting it among lots of things. And you just happen to be upset, that you're not one of the things that they're paying attention to.
Right. You're not the most quote unquote important, right? Because it doesn't matter how important, if you have ADHD, it doesn't matter how important a thing is, right? That doesn't control whether or not you can pay attention to it, right? Because
the threshold is, does it exist?
Yeah, and then you're paying attention to it. Yeah. And then the whole like, well, it's important. The whole, like people say like, oh, if it was important, you'd remember and that kind of stuff, right? Like that just isn't true. I mean, for anybody, actually, that's one of those kind of bullshit things that sounds true, but isn't. But it's particularly not true for people who have ADHD and other neuro-spicy, traits.
I wish it was true. That'd be dope.
It would, wouldn't it? It would be so fucking useful if that was true.
I think it's more like if it's stressful and urgent, you have a higher chance of remembering. It has nothing to do with importance. Like some of the most important things is like invest in your 401k, go to your doctor every 6 months for that shit. You can forget that instantly. It's important, but
I would say all of the productivity books and stuff like that are attempts at understanding the self through a lens of a thing you're trying to fix, probably because you have some kind of neuro-spiciness, which is like, hey, I'm having a hard time paying attention to things that feel like they're obviously important, Why is that hard? And how can I not have that be a problem? It's like, oh, we'll try using a getting things done system. Or it's like, oh, dealing with these context switches in the workplace is just kind of killing my morale, making me want to die. Then it's like, oh, well, read DevOps and figure out like all these things are just
or read Deep Work, which resonated with all three of us for obvious reasons in retrospect.
I think actually it resonated less with me than it did with the two of you, which I think is like in retrospect also interesting, right? Because like so many of because like the overall like message and vibe, I'm like, I think this makes sense, right? But the practical details of how to do it, all of those were like, this would only make things worse for me, right? And I think that to me that's one of the most important realizations, I think, with this idea of, in retrospect, thinking of things that you've read, is again, it's separating the idea of what should work or what you should be able to do versus what the reality actually is, right? Because you can take any technique like the Pomodoro technique or certain kinds of like blocking the day or certain kinds of listing management things or whatever, right? And any one of those, depending on the kind of brain you've got, could be extremely useful or extremely counterproductive, right? And so much of what like our own, each of our personal journeys have been through all the readings that we've been doing over time has been not knowing exactly how our brains were, nor how they differed from like the authors who were trying to tell us how we could do things in a better way, right? And then trying to apply that approach to our lives without actually being able to meaningfully like investigate and think about like, okay, how does this approach make sense given how our brains work? Because we didn't really know how to think about how our brains worked, right? It was still couched in terms of like, well, it should be like this shouldn't be hard, right? Like our brains should just do this or whatever. And so that was how at least I tended to read all of those books, right? So that when I then went and tried to apply a technique, and it didn't work, my response would be, or my internal response would be, oh, like, I guess I'm just bad at this, like that's the versus the reality of like, oh, this technique doesn't make sense.
It's like wearing
on to the next one.
It's wearing a poorly fitting sweater, It's like, it's not the sweater for you. It's fine.
Yep.
Yeah. Is it sweaters that are the problem or is it just this one? Yeah. You got to be able to disentangle.
Yeah. So as for books, I would say I've tried to read a bunch of books on autism in particular, but also ADHD. But most of what I've actually gotten of value has been from like being on TikTok and following people who have ADHD or autism and just talk about their experiences, right? And there's actually this kind of interesting movement in the autistic adult community of this. There's this like clash between autistic adults and then the psychiatrists and psychologists who study them, who are mostly not autistic, right? Mm-hmm. And there's like this ongoing, increasingly kind of negative battle going on right now, which is I'm not going to go into the details because I don't think most people wouldn't care, but it is very interesting if you go like onto those subsets of like Twitter and other places.
Because what you're saying is it's like there's people with autism going onto TikTok and saying like, here's what my experience has been, or here's something that I've gone through. And then on the flip side, you've got psychiatrists or psychologists, whatever, coming in being like, that's not how that works.
That's not technically it, or it's like,
but that's what happened to me. So.
Yeah, but it's also because like it's coming from the medical perspective, right? And the medical perspective comes from the idea that deviations from the norm are deficits, right? Yeah.
And so disorders.
So it's a deficit based model, and so one of the most important things I learned, which was probably from my wife, like because she's been surveying the whole world of all of this information for a few years now. So I don't think it's like sourced in any one book or anything, but is about the social model of disability versus the medical model of disability, right? Where the medical model says you're different, there's something wrong with you, right? It's a deficit compared to what's normal. And so that's a problem that we now identify and then treat, medically, right?
Just like we're talking about with ADHD, it's like deficit is like in the name, even though it actually is not a deficit at all of anything.
Versus the social model, which basically says people vary, right? And your ability,
I'm with you so far.
Your ability to get by in the world depends on the structures that society has put in place and how hard they are for any given person along that variation, right, to navigate, right? And so it's really easy to understand when it comes to like physical disabilities, like a wheelchair user, right? Like is going to have trouble reaching up high, right? Mm-hmm. There's some very like obvious things like that where it's like, so that's why we have like in the US, we have the ADA, which is terribly enforced and not very good, but way better than nothing, right? And so that's why we have wheelchair ramps places and that kind of stuff, right? But without that, everything was designed at, like average person height, right? Which definitely discounts people in wheelchairs and stuff, right? But the idea is that, well, why is that person disabled, right? Are they disabled because they're in a wheelchair? Because disability means you can't do something, right? So like if you can't flip a light switch because it's out of reach, is it because you're disabled or because the light switch is just too high? Right. Because you can just keep putting it higher until a shorter person can't reach, right?
Yeah, the social model basically points out that it's all about the interaction between yourself and the structures that exist, right? And so it's not
that the structures are artificial and created by society.
Yeah, we made everything. So it's like, if it's the case that you need a light switch in a lower or higher place. I mean, you talk about like really tall people aren't referred to as disabled, but like they can't fit in fucking anything.
Yeah, tall. Really tall people are actually disabled, right? But we don't think of it that way because tallness is thought of as a good trait, right?
Yeah, and you can never have enough of it.
Yeah, you just keep going.
Have you read stories about like Andre the Giant trying to travel, and like he couldn't fly in a typical. He literally could not fit in any place on a typical plane, so he would have to have like a separate private flight or some kind of giant helicopter, and then like he'd go to the hotel and he had to shit in the bathtub because
he couldn't sit on the toilet
because he couldn't fit in the area where the toilet was, and also if he sat on the toilet, the dude weighed like 700 pounds, so like he would just like crush the toilet. And nothing is designed for this person. But again, like you're talking about, it's an
interaction.
People will talk about a lack of something as a disability, but not too much of something as a disability.
Yeah.
Right.
And sometimes they do, but it's more rare, right? Because it's thought of like in these good terms. But that again is the idea of like the social versus medical model of disability. I think the main problem that I've always had with books about ADHD and autism is they're all couched in the medical model of disability, right? Which basically just says, oh, you're broken. Here's how you're broken. Here's all the ways you're responsible for addressing it, right? And like, here's all the things you should be doing to like make your life easier, right? But things that are more couched in the social model tend to be about, like, well, here's how you can like work with your workplace. Here's how you can work with your friends and family. Here's how you can like, basically it's much more about like it's not that there's something wrong with you. It's that the context in which you're in doesn't match the traits that you have. So given that there's nothing wrong with you and the world is broken, actually, like how can you now deal with that fact? And so many of the tips are going to be the same, right? But it really does matter a lot how it's framed when you're working through this stuff. So I think the one book that I think I would recommend for at least for autism is Unmasking Autism, which is more focused on women with autism because they're also underserved by the medical community. Because the medical model of autism is like focused on young boys, right? And so
women with ADHD too.
It's ADHD too. Yep, exactly. So yeah, so they don't do a good job of actually like understanding. Well, what about also specifically young white boys, right? And so it doesn't take into account the context that oppressed groups have, because that completely changes what these things look like to them, because their survival mechanisms to deal with the fact that they're autistic or ADHD or whatever have to be different. So their masking is different. The end result is different, right? And so this book actually does a good job of talking about things from a social model of disability, and then also focusing on not just what it means to be a white adolescent who has autism, right?
Right.
So that's really the only book I can really even recommend at this point. All the rest I've just disliked for various reasons. But I would encourage anybody who wants to dig deeper into this stuff to go into the active community of your fellow people who have the same divergences that you've got, right? Because at minimum, and like there's a lot of misinformation there too, of course, right? Because
I was going to say, right? Watch out for that. Because people
don't go there like looking for truth, right? Because if you do, like the first thing you'll discover is like all of a sudden everything is an autistic trait, right?
Yep.
And like
it's easy to go down a very weird rabbit.
It really is. It really is. But that's, to me, that was a place where like you still treat things skeptically, but you get to hear. I think the most important thing for me is
experiential.
Is actually just hearing other people's experiences and realizing that like, oh, like getting a better understanding of myself relative to people describing their actual fucking experiences, rather than these medical things that say like, from the outside, here's what it looks like is happening, right? With no nuance and no context or anything. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also like you're saying, when it's easy for people to see this when it comes to physical stuff, right?
Yeah.
Where if you're just like, I don't have legs, so stairs are a big problem for me. People are like, oh yeah, I see that, right?
It's hard to argue against, right?
Yeah, you're like, okay, fair, right? But when it comes to mental stuff, there's
the attitude is like, trust. Just get over it. It's kind of
because
it's a communication
if you say
problem,
like
90% of the time, right?
Yeah, because it's a communication and trust, right? Because if you say like, hey, this thing that you're asking me to do, or the way that you're asking me to do it, is really fucking hard for me. Can we do this in a different way, right? But like they may see that and go, what are you talking about? This is fucking easy, and you're smart. Figure it out, right? Mm-hmm. Except like,
or they'll say, well, it's hard for me too, because they don't understand the difference.
Right. And so, means, right? Yeah, so it's because they can't see, they can't see like that thing that's going on in your brain that looks different to what's going on in their brain, right? And so there's a lot of like, you just get so much pushback when you're trying to ask or have people sort of like work with you on these like ways that you're different from them mentally. And oftentimes you will feel like you have to just constantly be trying to convince somebody that this is a real problem, and that, you're not just like trying to get out of it or trying to be lazy or whatever the case may be. And I think that's something that's just kind of like, I think it's going to be an ongoing battle for just a long time.
Oh yeah, it'll keep going. But so many of the accommodations too, depending on what's going on for a person, can just be so easy, because it's like, open floor plan, worst thing for almost every neurodivergence in the universe, right?
Honestly, it's the worst thing for everybody.
It's for everybody, right? But particularly bad for if you have ADHD and can't manage your focus. But hey, noise canceling headphones, right? But there are some workplaces that don't allow you to wear headphones, right?
Which is insane.
So there's like if you're in a meeting, right? Like again, also meeting is ADHD kryptonite, right? But if you're allowed to stand up and like move around, or if you're allowed to use a fidget because other people or don't get weird about that, like all of a sudden you can participate and focus and be part of the meeting, right? But again, like workplaces have these stringent rules in place of like, if you're being distracting by managing your own distractibility, right, then now you're a problem. So sit still. And also, and for autistic people, it's like, I need you to look me in the eye so that I know that you are paying attention and understand what I'm taking, right? But for an autistic person, like looking away makes it a lot easier to process what's going on, right? And so like when an ADHD or an autistic person is like not looking at you is usually when they're actually paying attention, right? So these little things that are actually easy to accommodate, even those aren't being accommodated.
Because they look like the opposite of what it looks like to be engaged.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that there's a problem there too, which is that like the conversation I think that doesn't work is just saying something like, "Look, I need to look away, and you're gonna have to deal with that. Like I just need to look away." It's because again, comes down to like different people need different things in this particular scenario. So if someone's like, "I just need to know that you are paying attention, and I don't know how to read that given who you are," that's what's happening, right? Simple. It's just like if there's any other communication problem, right? So coming in and just saying like, look, I'm just going to be looking away and I'm going to be spinning a fidget spinner every time we're having a meeting is not a solution yet. You know what I mean? There's a two-parter here, which is the other person being able to say, I need to understand what it looks like when you are engaged so I can know like where I'm at in the conversation, if I need to back up, if you're missing something, you know, et cetera. I do need some form of feedback, right? So what can we do? This is, I think, what it comes down to: constructing a solution together to find something that works.
Right. Because both groups have things that they need, right?
Yes.
And so you need to be able to talk through the expectations on both sides and the reason for those expectations so that you can come to a nice solution that works.
Yeah.
Better for everybody. It's not going to work great for everybody necessarily, but works better for everybody.
And I agree. The problem like typically with this is that because this is always couched in like, well, the neurotypical way is the right way, right? Like that's like, then the conversation always becomes, how do you get basically, how do you do what I need you to do always becomes a conversation, right?
It's a little too focused on the specifics. So you're pointing like eye contact, like, okay, but how do I get you to make eye contact? It's like, just drop the fucking eye contact. What do you need the eye contact for? You know, go back up a layer, abstract a little bit.
But it is a meeting of needs, right? Like
100%.
It is always best as a discussion. You have to figure out.
Yeah. Because if somebody says, I need you to make eye contact with me so that I understand, you know, whether or not you understand what I'm saying, right? But then if the other person says, I need you to not need me to make eye contact.
Well, but
these are totally
those are the wrong terms, right? Because if a person says like, I need you to make eye contact so I know you're paying attention, that doesn't make any sense because eye contact doesn't mean I'm paying attention. And in fact means I'm not, right? So because
you're just focusing on
I'm saying, but in that case, oftentimes you won't even have the second part of that sentence, which is really the important part. I need to know that you're paying attention is actually what's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
It's getting fixated on a specific version of what that looks like, right?
Yeah. It's because people are again, because they're still focusing on the normalized concept of equating like eye contact with attention, right? Which is actually, that part isn't true. And as soon as you understand that part isn't true, now you get to have the discussion of, okay, what are we actually trying to accomplish? Which is
exactly, you got to go
know if people can pay attention because the context allows for that, and are, right? And even for that, like, why do you need to know that? Because if you do, it's probably in a context where like
if you have a conversation with someone or you're trying to make sure that they understand what you're saying, it's wild to say like you don't get any cues.
Well, no, but there's also a matter of trust there too, right? Because like if someone's struggling to understand and you're like having one-on-one conversation, hopefully they would be like, hey, I'm having trouble understing, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So that's where all the nuance comes in.
But they don't have to look at you when they say that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So and I think as like a final note, you know, it is when we're talking about this idea of like talking through these things, and you know, if we say, it's easy to make an accommodation, like if you're talking to somebody,
certain accommodations,
certain accommodations, right? But what I think is always the challenge is like it's not about something being easy; it's about it being new, right? Yeah. So like the fact that like what was real easy, putting on a mask during a pandemic.
Yep.
Super fucking easy, right?
Yep.
But many people have this oppositional issue where like if you ask them to change their behavior, that is a personal attack. Yep. Fuck you, go away, right? And any kind of accommodation you ask for, even if you're asking somebody to do something for their own protection, because you asked them to do something that they weren't already planning on doing, that is you trying to take control of their life or take decisions away from them, right?
Yeah. And that's what happens to
that
most
pushback.
Most neurodivergent people or disabled people, physically disabled people, that's what they run into, right? Is they actually just don't ask for accommodations because they know that the response is going to be, well, how do I not do that though, right? And it just like universally is like if you listen to anybody's lived experience as a disabled person of any type, right? It's you guys get this sense of just like it isn't worth the fight because it's just always a fight, right? And so also for listeners who are not neurodivergent in any way, please pay more attention to this for the people around you because it makes a huge difference about how you respond in those situations and having somebody there to also back a person up, right? And because basically disabled people of all types are always left having to somehow prove that the thing that they're asking for is a reasonable request, right? And that's where the conversation starts rather than like Sam was saying, like, how do we actually just have a conversation about how do I get to express what's true for me or you believe me?
Yeah.
And then we start from there and then figure out, okay, how do we make this work, right? Because if most people, most like able-bodied neurotypical people start from the position of disbelief and of oppositional defiance, right? And so at minimum, like if you're finding yourself doing that, but also this is true for anybody who just isn't different along a particular dimension that somebody else is, right? Even if you are disabled, if somebody else has a different disability, there's a really good chance you're going to do the human thing and be like, I don't know about that one. You know?
Well, it's a difference in understood experience, right? Yeah, it has actually almost nothing to do with disability or neurodivergence or anything else. It's just that
you're just more likely to be aware of the idea that people can vary if you significantly vary from quote average.
Yeah, but in a way that makes it such that your experience is the only thing you know. So when someone else is like, I'm having this experience, you're like, what? But are you though? That's normally what the response is. And it's not like it's not a crazy thing to say because the reality is like,
well, it is a crazy thing to say. Or no, it's not crazy. It's a really bad thing to respond with.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
your response should always be, I believe you. And then internally, it's totally fine to say, I don't get it. You shouldn't get it if it's not your experience, because how the fuck could you, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense to be like, I don't get it, therefore, like, I don't believe it, right? When it's about somebody else's lived experience, you know? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but I don't get it as a cop-out, though, because, like, it's more that, like, I don't relate. But
well, I guess that's what people mean, right.
Yeah, but it's like, it's
well, they're actually just saying that's not my experience, therefore it's not your experience, right?
Yeah, like these are conversations people have about like about gay couples or something, right? They're like, I just don't get it. It's like you do though, right? Because like you're married, you have a spouse, they're married, they're together. It's you get that concept of like people being a couple, right?
Yeah. But it's also
what you're saying is this doesn't look like what I expected, which is different from saying I literally don't understand this, right? But again, it's all about like if you're a person who fits the mold of how the world is kind of set up, then you're incredibly accustomed to not being inconvenienced, right? Like that's just the way that you operate, and this is referred to as privilege, right? Yep. You just don't get inconvenienced by things because things are set up for you, and so then what happens if somebody comes in who needs an accommodation? That is them. That's a person who is inconvenienced by almost everything all the time, transferring a small little nugget of their inconvenience over to you, and the outrage from that transfer is just immense, right? Of like, hey, let's share in this inconvenience a little bit. Like you can help me, and I know it's going to be like a little bit more mental effort for you to use my correct pronouns or like respect the fact that I have a hard time making eye contact or whatever, right? Like it's going to make because like I get it. If like if you need eye contact to feel comfortable and I need no eye contact to feel comfortable, right? There is no middle point where we're both content. That's not.
You got to figure out something. You got to figure out something else.
Yeah, everybody's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, right? And the goal isn't to like solve the problem. Be like, okay, here's a way where everybody's comfortable now, right? It's a way to transfer the discomfort, like
share it.
It's to share it, but it's also to transfer some of the burden that people who have a lot more discomforts they have to deal with, just like trying to it's like when I think of this for things that like as a white dude, right? Like anything I can transfer onto myself that other people have to deal with, like that's actually just good, even if I hate it, like that's actually
Because even if you hate it, it's a small, tiny percent.
I don't need them to share. Yeah, I don't need them to like meet me. Like, I don't need them to meet me halfway somewhere, right? Really, I should just take that on, because like if you have the privilege to take it on, like that's what you should strive for.
Yeah, but what's the saying? It's like if you're on top, then equality looks like oppression, right? Yeah. Like if you've never been inconvenienced in your life, and somebody comes in and they're like, "Wow, literally everything is an inconvenience for me. Can you kind of help me with this a little bit?" And then you're just like, "Fuck that, I'm out of here," because you suddenly have to think about what you're doing for the first time in your life, you know, which is hard.
It is hard. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's not to say that any of this is easy.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's all hard.
Straightforward, but hard.
It's simple but difficult. Yep.
Simple but difficult, which is it's a real thing. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Thank you very much for the questions. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.